If you've struggled trying to get a tight low end on your songs, then this is the video for you. I'm going to share with you 4 insanely easy ways to tighten up the low end of your mix with tools that you probably already have. And if you have any questions after watching this video, just drop them in the comments and I will come back and do my best to answer them. Now, the song I have today is something that's a little bit different than what I typically mix because it's very, very complex. There's so many layers here. This is a symphonic metal track by a band called Demoralize. And if you like what you hear, definitely go and check in the description because I have links to all of their music. So very quick overview. We have real drums, real drum kit, vocals and vocal harmonies, giant choir stacks. And then we have a full orchestral arrangement, timpanis, we have trumpets, tuba, horns. Needless to say, we have a lot of stuff that's gonna make our mix muddy. And I'm gonna teach you how to clean that up so that it's tight and focused and precise. These same strategies can be used on any genre, it doesn't matter. And just to give you a sense, I'll play a quick section here so you can see how tight the low end is, so I'm not just making a bunch of stuff up.
Into his eyes, the hell is fire. I feel he shall lie, lost in the vortex.
Yeah, it's massive. So first things first, we want to make sure that any instrument that has maybe some low frequency content to it that it doesn't necessarily need, we need to get rid of that. Okay, realistically, when we're mixing, this would look like putting a high pass filter on it or a low shelf to carve out some of those frequencies for the other elements. When you have big arrangements like this, we have to make space for everything to live. Otherwise, that's when you get a lot of frequency overlap and then your songs very quickly start sounding muddy. Okay, so let's go through the different instruments and I'll show you what I've done to remove some of that low end information that doesn't necessarily need to be there. Something very important when you have live drums is you need to go through and edit them a lot, okay? So if the particular track isn't being utilized in one section, clean it up. Get rid of all the junk, okay? We have a bunch of toms, and these are full tracks normally, okay? If you don't get rid of all of the non-tom hits, you have a ton of boomy, muddy bass buildup that is just gonna take all the clarity out of your mix. Now, the floor toms can have a ton of bass energy, and if you look at my EQ, I have a low shelf, doing about 8 dB gain reduction, pulling out the rumble of the floor tom, okay? And then we also have something right around 190 hertz. Let me boost this up, and I'll loop this section just so you can hear. Okay, it's this woolly kind of almost like a beach ball sound or something. This is also living in the same region as the snare drum fundamental, so I'm just carving some of that out. Not doing that. Okay, just pulling that out. That's going to give the vocals a little bit more space. It's going to give more space to the guitars and the bass. And we really don't need this for you to know that that is a floor tom, right? We play the drums and listen to this fill. It still sounds like a good drum fill. Right? We're not missing anything anymore, okay? We're just cleaning it up. Let's take a look at the drum cymbals. Here I have a lot going on. I have a high pass filter right here at 200 hertz, okay? We're rolling off the entire low end of the overheads. Okay, I want to get rid of all of the kick drum resonance and the boominess and the buildup from the toms in these overheads because it's already captured by those close mics. And then we also have room mics that have a little bit of information. So we're going to clean that up. I also am scooping out a bunch around 500. So let me just play this and show you what all this EQing does to the low end to tighten up the sound. Okay, without it. With it. All that boominess is gone. Now you might be wondering, but how do I know if that is the sound I want or not? So that comes down to what the purpose is of the overhead microphones on the drums, or what the purpose is of the instrument that you're EQing. Do you need the low energy for it to be defined in a mix? If the answer is no, then get rid of it. There's no reason to keep it there. In the case of this song, we have these drum cymbals. That's the purpose of the overhead mic, is to capture the drum cymbals. So we can get rid of a lot of the sub information, a lot of that bass muddiness without it changing the effect of those overheads, right? We want to hear the cymbals. We can hear them clearly. We don't need the mud there, but we can be pretty aggressive in this region and get away with it because that's not critical to the sound of the drum kit, at least for the vision of this song. So here is the drum room mics. You can see I'm taking out a ton of low energy from this. This is not the prettiest EQ. I don't recommend you be this surgical, but I'm hearing a lot of weird buildups and resonances that I had to do some very creative EQing to make it sound the way it needed to sound to fit into this mix. So let me show you what it sounds like before and after of just the room mics. Okay, if you do not do that much cleanup, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have a muddy mix. And don't be afraid to do more than like 3 to 5 dB of EQing. You need to take away as much as you need to make the low end clean and tight. But if you can avoid it, less is usually more here. If we go to the drum bus, I also have a high pass filter rolling off any of the really deep subsonic rumbles from either the toms, maybe whatever's left over in those overheads, and then the kick drum. If you're working in hip hop, something like that, sometimes the fundamental of the song will go down to 32 or 28 hertz. Okay, so you don't necessarily always want to roll off the deep, deep sub bass. But in this case, to maintain a nice, clear punch to this drum kit, we're going to tighten it up by rolling off some of that really deep subs. I recommend if you're going to use a high-pass filter, try using it on the group level rather than the individual instrument level, because you could run into some weird phase problems if you're not using a linear phase EQ on, let's say, your kick track, okay? This will only ever be a problem if some of this kick track that was recorded is also recorded in these other tracks, okay? And guess what? Because these are live drums, you have a little bit of kick bleed in the snare tracks and the cymbals for sure, and the room mics, all those. And that can cause all sorts of weird phase problems where all of a sudden you have a really powerful kick drum and then you put the high pass filter on thinking you're tightening up the bass. What ends up happening is you shift the phase response and it cancels out with something in those overheads or whatever. And now you lose all the power. To avoid all of that nonsense, just do the high pass filter on the drum group bus. Okay, let's take a look at the bass guitar because this is another critical element. So here's the EQ I have on here. We have a high pass filter at about 65 hertz. Again, this is a 12 dB per octave slope. You can make it more steep if you really don't like the sub frequencies in your bass guitar. Let's say if you just want a warm sound, not like a really powerful deep bass sound, you can tighten up this band, but just be aware that the tighter you go, the more phase distortion you're introducing. So trust your ears on this one and then find a sweet spot that allows it to be tight, but give the kick drum some space to breathe and add a little bit of that really deep sub powerful bass. Okay? If we go too high, you could hear the bass guitar becomes really thin. Now the mix is going to have no power. If we let it go all the way out, you get this deep extension, but the bass guitar starts feeling a little bit more loose, okay? Those deep sub frequencies need more time to develop. It makes the bass feel maybe a little bit less tight. So let's adjust this a little bit. So for me, I feel like a sweet spot is right around like that 65 hertz. Okay, we also are doing some dynamic EQ right around 80 hertz. This is where the punch of the kick drum is living for this track. We can actually come into this analyzer and then monitor what the kick drum frequencies are, and now this will display in red over this signal. But right here is where that kick drum lives. So by carving a little of this out, okay, by pulling out 2 to 3 dB and then adding this dynamic band, that is just going to ensure that when the bass is hitting these notes, there's no buildup in that region, okay? So the kick drum has a spot to live in this mix. If this is boosted or there's too many bass frequencies here, That kick and bass are going to fight the whole time, and you're never going to get any definition out of your kick drum. Okay, so it's super important to make a little bit of space here for your kick drum. Okay, and you can also do some side chain tricks. I have a whole video on my favorite side chaining techniques. So when the kick drum hits it, it can actually duck this range for you automatically. So you get the best out of both worlds there. All right, the last really big problematic area is in guitars. So let's take a look at what I'm doing on the guitar bus. I have a low shelf, okay, all the way up to 115 hertz, pulling out 13 decibels. That is a lot, right? But guess what? The role of the guitar is not to hold down the bass of the song. The role of the guitar is to handle the mid-range and the aggression of it. So there's not a whole lot of aggression in mid-range below 100 hertz, okay? That's where the bass guitar is supposed to do its work. So let's let the bass do its job and pull out some of that out of this guitar track. Let me show you what it sounds like with all these bass cuts. Okay, if we get rid of this EQ. Right, it's so much better with this big roll off, this low energy. I also have two peaks that I'm cutting out. One around 130 hertz and another one around 350 hertz. Okay, let me show you what that sounds like. Okay, this 130 hertz is cabinet resonance. It's the ringing of the physical cabinet. So it's adding this unmusical just woof to the song. There's zero reason why you'd ever want that in there. So let's get rid of it. Now, almost all guitars that are recorded are going to have that thing in there somewhere. Some cabinets have it a lot more dampened, so you won't hear it as easily. Some are going to be really bad offenders. This one's pretty bad, so cutting this out really opens up the clarity of those guitars. Let's take a look at this at 340. It's like this weird nasal thing. It's like hong, 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 hong. Really good at impressions. I hate that sound in guitars, okay? It's this boxiness, and it almost always lives around 350 hertz, okay? So if you go and take an EQ and sweep around that area, you'll find it, and let's just get rid of it. Okay, don't take too much of it out, otherwise you punch a hole in your guitars. That frequency range kind of fills in spatially the middle of the mix. So this is like kind of where the bass guitar doesn't really do a good job. These guitars can fill that in. But so to find the sweet spot, I have a video also on this technique of bouncing your EQ up and down, and you'll very quickly know objectively where the sweet spot is. Right there. That's cleaning up all of that mud out of the guitars. Okay, and I guess I should talk about vocals. Let's just see what I got going on for vocals. So here's the EQ I have for my vocal chain. I also have a low shelf at about 188 hertz, okay, taking out 5 dB. This is going to clean up all the rumble, okay? The voice really doesn't have anything going on down here, so let's get rid of that crap. And then around 200 hertz, there's this weird chestiness to the voice. We want to make sure that that is tight, okay? If you have too much chest, it's going to fight the snare drum in your track. Remember, the snare drum lives around 200 hertz. It's also going to battle the guitars. So we want to pull a little bit of that out, but not too much, because that frequency gives the voice power and it gives it presence. It makes it feel like the vocalist is closer to you. So be very careful when you're adjusting this, because if you take too much out, the vocals just feel lifeless and like they don't have any weight to them.
My senses do.
Without it.
My senses do.
So in this case, because the vocals were recorded really, really well, it's not as obvious that muddiness or boominess that's there. But depending on the type of recording you get, you're going to have to either do a lot more or a lot less of what I'm doing right here, okay? But it should sound something similar to this.
My senses do.
All right, let's talk about EQing synthesizers and orchestral elements to a song. This is where I think a lot of people get really confused. Typically, these orchestral elements are accenting the song. They're not leading or driving the song by themselves. That we really want to go in and do a good job cleaning up the low energy. Here's some horns. This is without any EQ. With. And again, you can see what I'm doing. I have a low shelf, about 4 dB at 180 hertz. We got to get rid of that low energy. There's really no reason these horns should have any bass content to them. They can have some low mid, okay? But we really want to make that tight because, again, the guitars live here, the vocals live here, and in my opinion, those might play a bigger role in the song than this specific horn, okay? We also have some cuts around 460 hertz. Okay, this is going to be that muddy frequency that's going to be battling every single other element in this mix. Okay, so if we take a little bit of this out just to give the other instruments a little bit more space to live, it's not going to take away from the sound of the horns at all. Trombone didn't do a whole lot, just rolled off a little bit of this low energy. If you look at the cello, okay, string instruments, I'm usually pretty aggressive with. So this one we have a pretty aggressive low shelf. We're also taking a bunch of stuff right out of the low mids around 370 hertz. Let's hear what the difference here. So without any EQ. So again, this is something that doesn't sound like it needs a lot of EQ, but guess what? When you EQ this out, you instantly free up that space for another instrument to occupy. Without. Now I'm also taking out some of the 2K, so that's changing it a little bit tonally, but overall, these EQ moves don't change the feeling of that cello, right? How about these strings? Okay, take a look at this. I got a low shelf, and I'm taking 2 big chunks out. This piece here is freeing up space for the snare drum to live right around 200 hertz. This 415 is that muddy area where almost every instrument lives, so let's just take some of that out. And then that big low shelf. Okay? Don't need that. Let's get rid of that. All this is doing is adding boom. Right? It's just adding a layer of mud. Clean it up. Perfect. My third trick is to use a multi-band compressor, but just the low band of the multi-band compressor to tighten up and squeeze the dynamic range of any of the sub-bass containing elements in your song. For example, you might consider doing this on a kick drum or a bass guitar. So let me show you how to set that up so you don't strangle it and take away all the punch and natural character out of those elements. So I'm using FabFilter Pro MB on this bass bus here, and all I have is one band positioned at 172 hertz. So this is covering pretty much all those fundamental notes that this song is going to have. Now, there's some very important settings that I found that tend to work really, really well when you're using a multi-band compressor on a bass. We want to make sure that our attack isn't super fast. Fast attack means that it's reacting to the signal really quickly, and it's going to lower the level very, very fast. Now, that sounds like a good thing, but there's a few downsides. When it's really fast, you're basically constraining your bass to a very, very small dynamic range, okay? Which sounds maybe good, but it takes the life out of the bass guitar, especially if this is like a bass guitar with a human being playing the notes. There's some feeling there, okay? We don't want to take that all out. So by opening up the attack, it lets a little bit of those emotional moments or the places where the guitar player is hitting those strings a little bit harder, jump through this compressor and come out on top of the mix, okay? So it's going to retain the feeling. The other important thing to keep in mind is the release knob. If you want a super smooth bass performance that just kind of bobs up and down with the song like it's a more chill song, you might want to go a little bit longer on your release, okay? That's going to slow down the reaction time of your multi-band compressor. It's like making your multi-band compressor drunk and it's too slow to respond to things. But it gives it a smooth feeling. It gives it a little bit more vibe, okay? If you have a more aggressive in-your-face track like rock or metal, you might want to pull the release faster. Okay, this is going to give the impression of the bass coming closer to the listener, and it's going to be a little bit tighter and more controlled. So let me show you what this does.
I hear the
Okay, without any compression. Okay, it sounds very controlled. When this is bypassed, you could hear a little bit of the pick attack kind of jumping through. There's a little bit of this low energy woof kind of popping through it. With this compressor on it, it just makes sure that the bass is about the same volume the whole way. So you get a consistent bass performance that's going to feel like your bass is glued to the track. Okay, if we slow down the release. Let's go faster on the release. Okay, my fourth and final trick for helping you get your song to have a really tight low end is a little bit unconventional. Now, if you have a home studio, it's probably not ideal, right? We put it in a spare bedroom like this one, and then we try to just make it work. And if you have speakers, guess what? The sound that comes out of speakers is greatly influenced by the acoustics of your room. A lot of us don't have the technical know-how. A lot of us don't have the money to invest in totally tuning a room. So what I recommend is a good pair of headphones. These headphones will take away the sound of the room from your mix. And just so you're aware, the low energy range, the bass region of your song, is most affected by the room. So it's not uncommon for the frequency response of your room to vary by like 20 dB. That will cause you to make really bad low-end EQing decisions or compression decisions. The easiest way to get rid of that without having to go through the trouble of tuning and adding all these acoustic panels is to just buy a good quality pair of headphones. Now, if you're looking for a good quality pair of headphones to use to kind of figure out your low end, I have all of my recommendations in a guide that is in the description. That includes interfaces, monitors, headphones, cables, everything that you need in a home studio. Now, the headphones I suggest in that guide are pretty solid, but they could always be improved a little bit. And what I found is that using software like Sonarworks to flatten the EQ response out of my headphones seems to do a really good job, especially in the low energy range of the headphones. Okay, they have EQ profiles that will balance out all the sub bass all the way down to like 20 hertz. So you can really hear the full extension of your mix. And all you have to do to use that when you're mixing is add Sonarworks to your master bus or in the control room if you use Cubase. And then I just loaded up my headphone calibration profile to make your headphones sound super flat. Using Sonarworks with my headphones really gives me like laser precision when I'm mixing the low end of a song. And if you don't want to pay for Sonarworks, the next best thing is to load up some tracks that you know that the low end sounds really good, and then just reference those with your headphones on, and then switch over to your song. You'll know right away if something is off in the low end of your song that way. So I'm super curious, how do you tighten up the low end of your songs? Also, if you think I missed something or there's something that you do when you're mixing music that really helps to make that low end just super tight and punchy, let me know in the comments. And if you have suggestions for topics that you're struggling with or something that you need help with, let me know as well. As a reminder, don't forget to go to the description and download your free home studio gear guide. And with that, I want to thank you so much for your time and attention today. My name is Bobby Balo. I'm the mixing and mastering engineer at Raytown Productions, and I hope to see you in another video.